No, I think the current president of YU is a Rabbi Joshua Berman. I don't know much about him, but he seems to be an okay guy. He had one of those Times of Israel blog posts yesterday. It was making the rounds. Where he was talking about a new book concerning biblical Hebrew, and I thought it was interesting. Okay, I got to give a read to it, so I downloaded the book. It's produced by the same people, that same group of scholars in Cambridge, led by Professor Jeffrey Kahn. Does that name ring a bell?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes,
It
it
shows.
does.
So he wrote the book about Arabic and biblical Hebrew and Masoretic Hebrew and all these things. It was a good read. He sent me a personal email telling me to try to get the word out to everybody, what to know what I thought. So I mostly liked what he had to say. It was very informative. I think he made some good arguments. By the way, it wasn't religious arguments. Torah Bagoyim al Talmud. There was some chachma there. I didn't like one of the parts he was recommending. Create a whole website with his students about teaching people how to properly pronounce Tiberian Hebrew, and it basically sounds just like all the usual scholars come to a consensus. Except at one point, he was basically pointed out that around the time he was grabbing onto, by the way, which is relevant to this new book, he basically saw that the Vav had already shifted consonantally to a V sound, or similar to a V. Every now and then, there's a purist who points out to me that the weak pay and the weak bet sounds should be produced entirely by the lips, just like the strong forms of those letters. So if you make a bet sound, your lips, b, bob, and pop, right?
Yeah.
So you should be pronouncing your fey like a just with your lips, like instead of saying fairy or face, like I'm doing it a little bit with my teeth, I should say fairy and face, right? And you should be pronouncing bava like this, bava, bava. Okay, so it's a little bit harder. By the way, uh, I I I would say that indeed that's the way you're supposed to do it. There's truth to that. However, for audibly speaking, it makes the same sound. Okay, when if you weren't looking at the person and he was saying it well enough, it's like harder for people like us, especially with our American accents. Heck, anybody in the last few hundred years trying to produce any form of Hebrew, except for some Iraqis, have a really hard time trying to uh, produce a strictly labial V or F sound. It's just harder to do, but it comes out the same. You don't know if someone's doing it right. You won't know if he's adding his teeth a little bit there to help himself. So there's no real nafkamina. So Professor Kahn found that around the time he was dealing with, he was taking what would be called a synchronistic view of Tiberian Hebrew, just look at it right then and there in its place. So that's a word, synchronistic as opposed to diachronistic. I think that's the opposite. The two words that Professor Horncole is using a lot. So Professor Kahn was looking at, I guess, Tiberian Hebrew right then when he found this Arabic book. It was right about then that people started pronouncing their vowels as a V. Incidentally enough, the Remainers who were speaking Greek and Latin and Romance languages were also shifting at the time. It used to be Latin had a single letter; it looked like this, right? And it served the same function as a vav, and it became orthographically what we call the English W's and V's and U's. Why? They came in all different forms to indicate the different uses of this letter. And by the way, it depended where you are. Basically, if you're in Central Eastern Europe, it became a V, which is why I don't like pronouncing W's like a V. I don't like it doing it in Hebrew also. It's a very German thing. It's a very Nazi Amaleki thing to do. So it's very strange that you have good Jews who are trying to sound nice and traditional and good and Jewish, trying to imitate Hitler, and everybody else who pronounced that way. If you want to be as Jew as possible, stop pronouncing your Vav like a V. Okay, if you think about it. Either way, he found it that is a consonant, and it was shifting. So he recommends on his website in his book that's how you should be pronouncing your Vav, just like your vet. I pointed out to him, yeah, but it's a W sound. Sometimes it is, even in his system, and especially when it's connected to a vowel, as a semi-vowel. And all the evidence indicates that the shift happened like right before that. So that was the first. That was basically one of the first consonants we lost. So why should we lose that consonant? I don't know. Anyways, back to Professor Horncole. So Rabbi Berman was pointing out that Pentateuchal Hebrew, that is the Hebrew you find in the five books of Moses, happens to be older than the rest of the Hebrew you find in Tanakh. And the stuff you find, the Hebrew, you would find, let's say, in the last books, ones that we traditionally hold are the oldest books, Ezra, as that means Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles, and Divrei Yamim, have even more, I guess, Aramaisms than the rest of them. It indicates later Hebrew and later authorship. Now, Professor Berman was bringing this up to show that for some reason, scholarship, real good scholarship, that shows anything that doesn't fit with the orthodoxy that holds of biblical criticisms and the discovery that perhaps the Torah isn't as old as we Jews say it is, it usually is dismissed, some sort of religious bias. But this shows I guess, very good arguments for showing that, well, even if someone wanted to try, the later authors were trying to write the Torah and put it somewhere later in history, it would be a monumental task to do that. It's very difficult, and the Hebrew there indicates that it's significantly older than everything else. So before reading through it, I read the introduction this morning, I could have guessed what kinds of examples he would bring. So Rabbi Berman mentioned that one of the first things that people notice is the tendency towards deficient spellings. In the Torah, we've mentioned this before, you're more likely to find even present tense masculine singular verbs like poteach and shomer written deficiently. There's no vav there. Whereas in the last books, not only do you have those words written full with the vav, you even have vavs where there shouldn't be. Vavs indicating a kamatz katan already exists in the latest biblical books. That's a Sfardism. Okay, that's not that. That's
You
almost,
even see that. You even see that in the Tanakh, in the Korean, the Ketiv, sometimes.
yeah,
In the Torah itself. In the Torah itself, in like
yes,
Hazim.
yes. And another example he had was the word he, the feminine word, which is the feminine of who, is spelled who in the Bible, as though they're the same word, just sometimes it's feminine, so you have to know pronounce it with the chirik and not a vav. So I wanted to give a few examples of things I think are going to come up in the book. I'm just spoiler. I haven't read the book yet, but I intend to when I get a chance. I was busy today, and one of the things you can point out and pointed out to me, these are things that let's say Mefarshim have already pointed out that show how the Torah was using a type of Hebrew that wasn't even in use in the time of King David already and the other kings. It already was Old Hebrew. So the example is pual verbs instead of nifal. There's different ways that they tell you the six branch menorah, the central branch of the different binyanim of the verbs, even though there's some verbs that don't fit in there. There's all sorts of other differenter binyanim, but the classic ones that are in the textbooks. So nifal is to the pa'al, and the pual is to the pl. Okay, the pual is the passive of the pl. Now you find that words like vatukach and kubar instead of nilkach and or nilkacha and nikbar. Nikbar was buried. Avram was kubar. Kubar Avram. He was buried in Maras Machpelah instead of nikbar. That's one. The second is vavaipuch. Vavaipuch is the rule in the Bible, except when we want to have past perfect. Sorry, in the Chumash. But later it wasn't used so much. Later it's almost like they're forcing themselves to use vavaipuch in order to make it seem old and biblical or classical. The same way maskilim or just classical writers in Hebrew at the end of the 19th century used to start using vavaipuch. Another facet, which I'm guessing he's going to mention, is the use of the word "f" as instead of "with." Okay. Now in the Torah, you have a lot. There's a word "eth" or "eth," segol or tserei, depends on if it's its own word or not, which indicates the direct object of the verb. And the source of that word is aleph vav tuf. It's from the word oath. And then there's a word aleph tuf tuf, which is related to the word woman, by the way, which means with. Now, in its regular form, as a single word, it's just written as eth. It's never written as eighth. So and so is with eth, so and so. And that means with. But when it's, I guess it's in a nichsmach form, it's connected to something to indicate with whom. You have words like ito. If you said that someone did something to another, he is the direct object. Eth who, it's otho. And eth haim, it would be otham. But with them would be itam, with a negation of taf and a chirik. And with him would be ito. So using that form, that word eth to indicate with as opposed to emo, okay, is something that's more common early in the Bible. Even though already in Genesis you have emo, aleph mem, indicating with, the fact that you have very much at the beginning, this was used more often for with, that's another example. Another thing is names that end in the theophoric suffix yud hey vav. I don't want to say it just on its own. That's maybe close to even saying Shem Hashem, but You have names like who, well, anything as in who, basically, Eliyahu and the rest of them. That's something that you don't find in the Torah, period. There's only maybe two theophoric names, as I found in the entire Torah, and they put God's ineffable name at the beginning of the name. Yocheved and Yosef. We've discussed these before. But at the end of the name, mostly just something ale something or ale at the end. Next, Aramaisms. People point that out. The later you get into the Bible, the more Aramaisms you're going to have. Even in spellings. In Mishnah, we mentioned this before, Hebrew preserves Zion, Hebrew prefers Zion over Dalit, and Chet over Hay, and Shin over Tav. And there's many examples of that we're not going to get into. Also, here's something that's important. I hope this Professor Hornhole, includes in here is in the older Hebrew books, there's a much less tendency toward historical details and dates and exact names, especially with kings. In the book of Kings, or starting with the book of Judges, we mentioned the judges are basically leaders of the Jewish people. We don't say we have their names, and we don't have a date specifically, but we say how long each one had peace in his time, right? And then with the kings, it sort of goes way overboard with it almost, and it almost leads to many contradictions, but you can resolve those easily. The Vilna Gaon did a good job in it. Each king, his name is his father. For Judean kings, we have their mother's name, how old they were when they took the throne, how long they reigned. We date it to the reigns of other kings, and we even mentioned some Gentile kings in there. It says about Sancheriv, when he was assassinated, it says, Tachtav. And we could actually date that, what year of Hezekiah that was. And other examples. Even some things are dated to Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So once we get into the the post-exilic books, what do we have? They're dating everything. They're mentioning a lot of different kings and overlapping dates and times. In the Torah, we don't have anything like that. We don't know when each pharaoh ruled, no details, no dates. And as a matter of fact, anybody who's a king of anything, his personal name is left out. It's just a bunch of pharaohs. Pharaoh, Pharaoh, Pharaoh. So you don't know who's who. And Avimelech, Melech Plishtim. It's only when the Jewish people get to the land of Israel, and much later do certain pharaohs actually get a personal name, even though these pharaohs did have names. Okay, so that's another tendency. And he did make a point that there's less creative in the Torah than there is in the rest of the Bible. Okay, so we're going to see if he touches on all these.